Hey 7th and 8th graders, this is Skill Builder 1, and today we're going to be looking at a method for sight reading, or when you first get a piece of music, to give you some ideas of things that you should be looking at the very first time you see that music to help set you up for success as you learn it. And today we're going to be looking at Twilight Serenade. I handed this out in class, but if you lost your copy or need an extra copy, feel free to come see me and I will have extras for you. Remember, your job is to watch this video, do your best to understand the content and work on Twilight Serenade, and then next day one we're going to start working on this in class as a warm-up. So I don't expect it to be perfect by next week, but I do expect that you put in some time to practice this and try to understand some of the concepts. One other thing is that as 7th or 8th graders, I expect that you, for the most part, know how to play all of these notes already, or if you've forgotten some, which is fine, you know what to do to figure out how to play the notes. So either you go back in an old lesson book, or you Google C-string notes on viola, whatever you need to do to make sure you know how to play those notes. Of course, you're always welcome to come see me. I'm here 10th period. If it's a quick question, you can ask me before or after class, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over how to play notes, with the exception of one kind of funky note for violins. But I would expect that for the most part, you guys can be your own teacher and do some investigating on your own with that. And again, feel free to come see me if you need help. But you can see behind me on the board, it says stars. You all are stars, but stars is also the method of sight reading that we're going to be looking at today. So we're going to start with the S. And by the way, this is something I'd like you to memorize for next week. So even if you're still struggling with playing Twilight Serenade when we come back next week to look at this, I do expect that you have memorized what stars stands for. So the S in stars stands for sharps and flats. This is another way of saying the key signature. Probably most of you are familiar with what this means, but in case you aren't, if you take a look at the very beginning of your music and find your clef, to the very right of your clef, in every piece of music there will be a key signature. There could be sharps, there could be flats, there could be nothing. But whatever is there, that's indicating to you almost like the rule for the rest of the piece, saying these notes are sharp for the rest of the piece, but we're not going to mark them as sharp. You need to refer back to the key signature. So in our case here, we have one sharp, which is F sharp. So every time throughout Twilight Serenade, when you see an F, you know that it's sharp, unless it's marked otherwise. And there are a few times when it's marked as a natural, and so then you play it as a natural, but we'll get to that later. The other thing about this key signature, since only Fs are sharp, it means that everything else is natural. The one note that's really going to affect us as we play this piece is Cs. So Cs are now natural because they're not marked as sharp in the key signature. And so you can think back, how do I play a C natural on my instrument? And hopefully that's something you remember from last year. Violins and violas, it's putting your second finger close to your first finger. And for cello, and that's on the A string. And for cello and bass, it's 2 fingers on the A string to get a C natural for you guys. Okay? So that's sharps and flats, looking at the key signature, very important and a good way to set yourself up for success with playing a new piece of music, because you want to make sure you are playing the right notes right out of the gate. Now, sometimes the key signature could change in a piece of music. It does not here, and I intentionally picked one that does not do that. But just know you might need to scan through sometimes, and you'll see that the key does change. But we're going to move on to T. The T stands for time signature. So we found the key signature to the right of our clef, and to the right of your key signature will be the time signature. This tells us how many beats are in every measure, and it also tells you a little bit about how the measure is broken up, but that's something we will deal with probably in high school. Right now we're just looking at number of beats in the measure, and so at the very beginning you see that it says 4, 4. That means that there are 4 beats in every measure, and you can see that's true as you look through these first few lines. There's a lot of measures that have 4 quarter notes, so each quarter note is 1 beat. That makes 4 beats. There are some measures that have a dotted half note, which is 3 beats, and a quarter note, which is 1 beat, so 3 plus 1 is 4. And as you look through this, you can see that is true. Every single measure has 4 beats until you get to the 5th line, measure 25. And at measure 25, something happens. Remember I said the key signature can change? Well, the time signature can change too. And the time signature at 25 changes to 3/4. And at that point, there are 3 beats in every measure. For those last 2 lines, every measure has 3 beats instead of 4. This might be new to some of you. We actually started Medieval Wars in class last week, and that's in the time signature of 3/4. And I said for some of you, this might be your first time playing in 3/4. It does feel a little bit different, but it's the same concept as 4/4, except you're counting to 3 instead of 4. So that's the time signature. There is one other thing that goes with time signature, something else that you could say in place of T, which is tempo, or how fast the music goes. And there's normally a tempo indicator at the beginning of your music, and if the tempo changes in the middle, there'll be another indicator somewhere. It's normally a word, or sometimes it'll tell you how many beats per minute they'd like you to play using a metronome. In our case, it's a word. So if you look at the very beginning, it says andante. You can Google what that means if you ever are not sure what a word means, but andante means it's a relatively slow pace. It's not fast. We're just kind of keeping it easy for an andante tempo. So we're not going to play very fast at all in the beginning. But when we get to 25, when the key signature changes, or excuse me, the time signature changes, it says moderato. That's an Italian word, but it sounds like an English word we have, moderate. So this is a moderate tempo. So the beginning of Twilight Serenade is going to be slower than at measure 25. So we have to be aware that the time signature changes, but also the tempo changes too. Let's move on to the A. A stands for accidentals. I'll put an S because there is more than one accidental in here. An accidental is when a note is marked to be played in a different way than what's indicated in the key signature. So what I mean by that is our key signature right now says that there are F sharps. So if the composer marks that an F is natural, that's an accidental. Our key signature right now says that our C's are natural. So if the composer marks that a C is sharp, that's an accidental. Now, I've had students in the past look at that word and say it looks like it means it's an accident. So when I see an F marked as natural, I'll say, oh, I don't have to do that. That's an accident. I don't need to. They just put it there by mistake. That's not what that means. It just means that you are straying from the key signature. So you have to be on the lookout. And this, especially in the first 4 lines of Twilight Serenade, there are all sorts of accidentals. And you can see F sharps and F naturals and C sharps and C naturals. And so you can look through and make sure you know how to play all of those notes because they are different. An F sharp should sound different than an F natural. There's one other thing about accidentals, which is when there is an accidental, it only applies for that measure. So if a measure has a C marked as a C sharp, in the next measure, if you have a C written, it's back to being C natural. So we have to get used to playing music with accidentals. That does happen quite a bit in music, although it might be something new to you now. That's why we're working on it now. Okay, the R stands for rhythm. When you get a new piece of music, you should browse through it and see if there's any rhythms that you don't know, that you can't recognize how to play them. In this case, Twilight Serenade has very basic rhythms. You have quarter notes and dotted half notes, so 1-beat notes and 3-beat notes, and that's it. I picked this knowing that there isn't really any sort of complex rhythm in this, and it's stuff that every single one of us should be able to do easily. So I just wanted to note that that's what the R means, but we are going to skip it. And last but not least, the S stands for signs or symbols, either one. And basically when you get to the S, you should be looking through your music for any markings, any symbols that indicate a way that you should be playing something. And so the big one in here, if you look at the very, very end of the music under the 6th line, it says D, C, al fine. That's music, or that's Italian, and in music it indicates that you should go back to the beginning of the piece and play until you see the word fine, which hopefully everyone can see is at the end of measure 4. So when you play Twilight Serenade all the way through, like if you were performing it in a concert or if you were playing it for an audition, you would start at the beginning, you would play the whole thing, and at the end you would go back to the beginning and play the next 4 lines. So this 6 lines of music really is 10 lines. One of the reasons they do that is to save space. It would be a 2-pager if we rewrote, copy and pasted all the music. So it saves space, saves paper, looks a little bit neater doing it this way. So that's the big sign. The other thing you might see as you look through this are some bow directions, down and up bows. Again, should be very easy for us as 7th or 8th graders to know bow directions. You also will see some retakes where you have just played a down bow and you're going to do a retake to go to another down bow. I will tell you, this publisher, there are a few times they write in a retake and they mean it more of a breath mark, like you're taking a little break. You'll get there and you'll say, wait, I just played an up bow, I'm ready for a down bow, I don't need to do a retake. So if you get to a situation like that, no, it's not really a retake. But I do know at least before 5 it's a retake, and before 9 it's a retake, so there are some in there. And you'll see when I play it through with you where the retakes are. Okay. The last other little symbol before we play, this publisher likes to give you some hints. They'll write H2, H3, that stands for high 2, high 3, L2, low 2, if you're a violin or a viola, to tell you how to stretch your fingers and get them in the right spot. Cello and bass, they just write in some finger numbers for you, but those are more like hints. You wouldn't maybe see those in professional level music, but they're hints for you as a student to kind of help keep you on track. So that's stars. We went through the method of all the things you need to look at, all the things you need to know when you're looking at a piece of music. As you get better with this process, you might be able to do it in 30 seconds, but it took us about 10 minutes to do it, and that's okay. We will get better with this as we continue to learn and use it and get more comfortable with it. But right now I'm going to play Twilight Serenade. You're welcome to play along with me at home, or you can listen, but I want everyone to give this a fair, honest try so that we can do it together next week. The one note, let me just grab my violin here. The one note I want to show you how to play that many of you probably have not learned yet on violin. This is a note for violins. You see it in the first time in measure 13. It's the 3rd note. It's an F natural, and it's an E string note. So on the violin, when you put your first finger down in its regular position, that note is called F sharp. Okay, that's something that a lot of people don't realize, but your first finger note is called F sharp. To play an F natural, you're going to take your first finger and move it back. Okay, so it's kind of like we played that note B flat last year. It's like that, but on the E string. So you have F sharp and F natural. Okay? But here's Twilight Serenade. Regardless of the instrument you play, it's the same notes, the same pitches, but you might play on a different string, so it'll be higher or lower. You guys, I know, are used to that when we play in unison in class, especially if you're a cello or a viola. That happens a lot where you play in a different octave from the violins. So here's Twilight Serenade all the way through. This is going to include the tempo change and the DC Alfine. So 1, 2, 3, 4. that's all of Twilight Serenade. Do your best to learn this week. Remember, I'm available for questions, 10th period, before and after class, and we will see you next day one. Well, I'll see you before that, but we will see Twilight Serenade next day one in class.